From the PEP Radio Newsroom, this is the Morning News Blast. LGBTQ Nation is reporting. The Oklahoma Supreme Court ruled that former state education head Ryan Walters' attempt to force Christian nationalist propaganda into public school social studies curriculum violated the state's Open Meeting Act. Walters, who quit before the end of his term to work for a right-wing group that opposes woke teachers' unions, called the court's decision an incredibly aggressive attack on Christianity, the Bible, and on President Donald Trump. In June 2024, Walters and the Oklahoma State Board of Education issued a guidance saying that K-12 lessons should focus on the Bible's influence on history, literature, music, and other arts and culture. Walters' guidance mandated that every classroom contained a physical copy of the Bible, as well as copies of the Ten Commandments, the U.S. Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence. Walters had also required that future social studies texts include statements that inaccurately proclaim the Bible's and Christianity's influence on the country's founding, disproving conspiracy theories about the legitimacy of the 2020 election, and a theory that COVID-19 pandemic originated in a Chinese laboratory. The new textbooks would cost state taxpayers $33 million. However, while the Oklahoma State Board of Education and its new head of education, Lindell Fields, announced in October the state's plan to drop these changes, the 33 Oklahoma parents, children, public school teachers, and faith leaders who filed a lawsuit against the changes asked the state Supreme Court to rule on whether Walters violated state rulemaking laws. The laws require the Oklahoma State Board of Education to provide proper public notice before voting on implementing any new curriculum standards. The court found that Walters did not provide proper notice to OSBE members or the public about his changes, and that the curriculum standards ultimately submitted by Walters and the Oklahoma State Board of Education were substantially different from the version released publicly, according to KOKH-TV. As such, the court invalidated Walters' new standards and reinstated the 2019 version of the standards which existed before Walters' changes. In separate statements, Americans United and the Oklahoma Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, which represented the plaintiffs, celebrated the ruling. Today's decision will ensure that Oklahoma families, not politicians, get to decide how and when their children engage with religion, said Rachel Laser, President and CEO of Americans United. These new social studies standards violated students' and families' religious freedom by promoting one version of Christianity and advancing Christian nationalist disinformation. Not on our watch. Public schools are not Sunday schools. In response to the ruling, Walters said today the Oklahoma Supreme Court launched an incredibly aggressive attack on Christianity, the Bible, and President Trump. Yada, yada, yada. The Oklahoma Supreme Court striking down the history standards that so many Oklahomans demanded. Well, it's unclear which Oklahomans demanded the new standards, seeing as he refused to publicly release them as required by law. They struck down the history standards, spitting in the face of so many Oklahomans and, frankly, common sense. This is outrageous to see this kind of left-wing judicial activism in the state where every county voted for President Trump. Walters continued, "These justices should be ashamed of themselves. They should resign immediately." Nah, they're pretty good right where they are, and we'll explain in part 2 of the story why that is. That's part 1 of the story. We'll have part 2 tomorrow. If you are watching this video on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to our channel. PEP Radio is available on the Live 365 app, the PEP Radio page at paequality.com, Roku, and Alexa. Up next, we have the Meadville area weather forecast here on PEP Radio.